In a high-end restaurant bustling with the elite, a waitress dares to slap a black billionaire, triggering a shockwave that reverberates through her life and beyond. What drives her to this breaking point? And what happens when just 10 minutes later, his ruthless revenge unfolds? This isn't just about a moment of defiance, it's about the stunning aftermath that could change everything. Are you ready to witness how a single slap can shake the world of wealth and power? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Sophie Martinez moved through La Royale with practiced grace, balancing a tray of delicate champagne flutes. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the restaurant's burgundy walls, while the soft melody of classical piano music floated through the air. Her sensible black shoes made no sound against the plush carpet as she delivered drinks to a table of business executives. "Your champagne, gentlemen," she said with a polite smile, setting down each glass with care. Inside, her mind wandered to the stack of medical bills waiting at home and her mother's upcoming surgery. The restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of wealthy patrons and the gentle clink of fine china. Sophie straightened her crisp white apron and tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. At the next table, she refilled water glasses while discreetly checking her phone during a brief moment between tasks. No messages from the hospital. "Sophie, table 12 needs their orders taken," Carlos, another server, whispered as he passed by with a tray of elaborate desserts. She nodded, tucking her phone away. The contrast between her surroundings and her reality felt stark tonight. While guests casually ordered $100 bottles of wine, she calculated how many extra shifts she'd need to help cover her mother's medical expenses. A party of 4 beckoned her to their table. Sophie pulled out her notepad, her pen hovering over the paper as they debated between the duck confit and the Wagyu beef. Her smile never wavered, even as her feet ached from the long shift. "I'd recommend the duck confit," she offered when asked. "Chef Marcel's orange reduction sauce is exceptional." The dining room's energy suddenly shifted. Sophie noticed other servers straightening their postures and supervisors emerging from the kitchen. The maitre d' rushed past, adjusting his bow tie. Whispers rippled through the restaurant as heads turned toward the entrance. "Is that who I think it is?" one of her customers whispered, peering over Sophie's shoulder. The maitre d' was now leading someone to a prime table by the window. Other guests tried to appear nonchalant while stealing glances. Sophie caught fragments of excited whispers from nearby tables, though she couldn't make out the name of the important arrival. "Sophie," her supervisor called quietly, gesturing her over. "Table 15 will be yours." She nodded, straightening her uniform and gathering her notepad. As she approached the table that had caused such a stir, Sophie took a deep breath, focusing on maintaining her professional composure despite the buzz of excitement around her. The evening that had started like any other now felt charged with possibility, though Sophie couldn't have guessed how this particular guest would change everything. She made her way toward table 15, ready to take the order that would set unexpected events in motion. Elijah King strode into La Royale with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His tailored charcoal suit and commanding presence drew every eye in the restaurant. The maitre d' practically tripped over himself, leading the way to the best table in the house, centrally located with a perfect view of both the restaurant's ornate interior and the city lights beyond the window. "Mr. King, we're honored to have you dining with us this evening," the maitre d' said, pulling out a chair. 2 other men in expensive suits joined Elijah at the table, their leather briefcases carefully placed beside their chairs. Sophie's supervisor approached her with an urgent expression. "That's Elijah King, CEO of Kingdom Technologies. Handle this table perfectly." He straightened Sophie's name tag. "No mistakes." Sophie's phone vibrated in her apron pocket, probably another message from the hospital. She forced herself to ignore it, approaching Elijah's table with practiced poise. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to La Royale. May I start you with some drinks?" Elijah looked up, his steel-gray eyes scanning her briefly. "The Chateau Margaux 2015. 3 glasses." His tone was clipped, businesslike. While Sophie recorded the wine order, snippets of conversation drifted from nearby tables. "That's the billionaire who just acquired... Did you see the news about Kingdom Technologies?" In the kitchen, Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she input orders from her other tables into the computer system. Another vibration from her phone made her heart race. What if her mother's condition had worsened? The numbers on the screen blurred as she tried to focus. "Table 7 wants the duck," Carlos reminded her, passing by with a loaded tray. "Right, duck," Sophie mumbled, adding it to the system. She grabbed the expensive wine for Elijah's table, carefully carrying it on a silver tray. As she poured the wine, one of Elijah's associates was mid-sentence. "The merger needs to happen this quarter." Sophie's hand wavered slightly, but she managed not to spill. The evening progressed in a blur of orders and serving. Sophie moved between her tables, her mind split between her duties and worry about her mother. When she returned to take Elijah's dinner order, she pulled out her notepad with slightly shaking hands. "I'll have the Wagyu ribeye rare," Elijah stated, barely glancing at the menu. His associates ordered the sea bass and duck confit. Sophie nodded, jotting everything down while trying to ignore another phone vibration. 20 minutes later, disaster struck. As Sophie approached with their entrees, she realized too late that she had mixed up the orders in the computer system. Instead of rare Wagyu, Elijah's plate held medium-well beef. Elijah cut into the steak, his expression darkening as he saw the well-done center. "This is incorrect," he said coldly, placing his silverware down with deliberate precision. "I ordered rare." Sophie's stomach dropped. "I'm so sorry, Mr. King. I'll have this corrected immediately." "Is there a problem with the kitchen staff?" His tone was sharp, calculating. "Or is the issue with the service?" Sophie felt the weight of his stern gaze and the attention of nearby diners who had noticed the exchange. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, and she fought the urge to check it. "The mistake was mine, sir. I'll have a new steak prepared right away." The tension at Elijah's table grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Other diners pretended not to stare, but their furtive glances betrayed their interest in the unfolding scene. "Perhaps," Elijah said, his voice dripping with condescension, "you should consider a different line of work, one that requires less attention to detail." He picked up his crisp white napkin and tossed it dismissively in Sophie's direction. It fluttered to the floor at her feet. The gesture, so casual yet so deeply insulting, was the final straw. In that moment, all of Sophie's carefully maintained composure shattered. The weight of her mother's illness, the mounting medical bills, and now this public humiliation crashed over her like a tidal wave. Before she could stop herself, her hand moved of its own accord. The sharp crack of palm meeting cheek echoed through the suddenly silent restaurant. Sophie's hand stung from the impact, and Elijah's head snapped to the side, a red mark blooming on his cheek. Time seemed to freeze. Forks clattered onto plates. Wine glasses stopped mid-clink. Every eye in the restaurant fixed on their table. One of Elijah's associates half rose from his chair, mouth agape. The other fumbled with his phone, perhaps unsure whether to call security or record the incident. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as the reality of what she'd just done crashed over her. She had just slapped one of the most powerful men in the city. Her hands flew to her mouth in horror. "Mr. King, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper in the deathly quiet restaurant. "I didn't mean... I shouldn't have..." The restaurant manager appeared at her side, his face ashen. "Mr. King, please accept our deepest apologies. This is completely unacceptable behavior, and I assure you..." Elijah slowly turned his head back to face them, his expression unreadable. The red handprint on his cheek stood out starkly against his pale skin. Without a word, he stood up, straightening his expensive suit jacket. His chair scraped loudly against the floor in the silent restaurant. "Mr. King, please," Sophie pleaded, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. Please." But Elijah didn't acknowledge her or the manager. With deliberate steps, he walked toward the exit, his associates scrambling to gather their belongings and follow. The heavy wooden doors of La Royale swung shut behind him with a final-sounding thud, leaving behind a restaurant full of stunned onlookers and a terrified Sophie. The restaurant remained eerily quiet in the wake of Elijah's departure. Sophie stood rooted to the spot, her hand still tingling from the impact. The manager, Mr. Torres, gently took her elbow and guided her away from the dining area. "Sophie, what were you thinking?" he asked in a hushed tone, his weathered face creased with concern. They stood in the dimly lit corridor leading to the kitchen. "I'm sorry," Sophie whispered, wringing her hands. "It's just my mother's surgery, the bills. I've been so stressed, and when he treated me like that." Mr. Torres raised a sympathetic hand. "I understand you're going through a difficult time, but—" The front doors swung open with force. Elijah King strode back in, accompanied by an older man Sophie recognized as Antoine Bernard, the restaurant's owner. Mr. Bernard's usual jovial demeanor was replaced by a grave expression. "Where is she?" Mr. Bernard's accented voice carried through the restaurant. Mr. Torres led Sophie back into the main dining room. She felt dozens of eyes watching her every move, could hear the whispered conversations behind raised menus. "Mr. Bernard, please," Sophie started, her voice quavering. "I know what I did was wrong, but my mother—" "Non," Mr. Bernard cut her off sharply. "This is unacceptable. Elijah is not just a valued customer, he is a dear friend. What you did?" He shook his head. "Pack your things. You are terminated, effective immediately." Sophie's world spun. "Please, I need this job. My mother's surgery." "Is not our concern," Elijah interjected coldly, touching his still reddened cheek. With trembling hands, Sophie untied her apron. The walk to the employee locker room felt endless. Her colleagues avoided her gaze as she collected her belongings, stuffing them into her worn backpack. The sound of hushed conversations and clinking cutlery from the dining room seemed to mock her. Clutching her bag to her chest, Sophie pushed open the heavy back door into the alley behind the restaurant. The cool night air hit her tear-streaked face. She had taken only a few steps when a familiar voice stopped her. "Ms. Martinez." Sophie turned to find Elijah King standing there, his tall figure silhouetted against the streetlights, waiting for her. Sophie's heart leaped into her throat at the sight of Elijah King. The alley's dim lighting cast harsh shadows across his angular face, making him appear even more intimidating than he had in the restaurant. She instinctively took a step backward, her shoulder blades pressing against the cold brick wall. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've already lost my job. I can't afford any legal troubles." To her surprise, Elijah's expression softened slightly. "That's not why I'm here, Ms. Martinez." He adjusted his expensive suit jacket and maintained a respectful distance. "Your actions tonight were, unexpected." Sophie clutched her bag tighter, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Most people," he continued, "wouldn't dare to stand up to me regardless of the circumstances. That takes a certain kind of backbone." "I shouldn't have hit you," Sophie admitted, her eyes dropping to the ground. "It was unprofessional and wrong." "Perhaps," Elijah took a measured step forward, "but it showed me something interesting about your character. How would you like to work for my company?" Sophie's head snapped up, certain she had misheard him. "What?" "King Technologies. We have an opening in our operations department. The pay is considerably better than waiting tables, and it comes with full medical benefits." His eyes met hers steadily. "Including family coverage." Sophie's mind raced. Was this some kind of cruel joke? "I don't understand. Why would you offer me a job after what I did?" "Because you've demonstrated qualities I value. Resilience under pressure, conviction in your actions, and the courage to stand up for yourself." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. "This isn't charity, Ms. Martinez, it's an opportunity. One that will test your capabilities in ways serving dinner never could." Sophie stared at the card, her hand trembling slightly as she took it. The embossed letters caught the light. King Technologies, in bold text, with an address in the city's business district. I don't have any tech experience," she admitted. "You have life experience," Elijah countered. "And sometimes that's more valuable than a resume full of credentials. The position starts at $70,000 annually, with full benefits effective immediately." Sophie's breath caught in her throat. That kind of money would cover her mother's surgery and then some. Still, doubt nagged at her. "Why are you really doing this?" "Let's just say I recognize potential when I see it," He straightened his tie. Even if it comes with a slight sting. He touched his cheek again, but this time there was the ghost of a smile on his face. Sophie looked down at the card again, then back at Elijah. Despite her misgivings about his true motives, she knew this might be her only chance to help her mother and pull herself out of financial distress. "When do I start?" she asked, her voice stronger now. "Monday, 8 a.m. sharp." Elijah turned to leave but paused. "And Ms. Martinez, don't make me regret this decision." Sophie nodded, clutching the business card like a lifeline. "I won't, Mr. King." Sophie stood in front of King Technologies' gleaming glass headquarters, her reflection distorted in the modern architecture. The building stretched toward the sky like a silver needle, nothing like the cozy warmth of La Royale. Her simple black blazer from the thrift store suddenly felt inadequate compared to the stream of well-dressed professionals flowing through the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby buzzed with purposeful energy. Employees swept through security turnstiles with practiced ease, while Sophie fumbled with her temporary visitor badge. The marble floors gleamed under bright LED lights, and the click of her sensible shoes echoed uncomfortably loud. "Ms. Martinez?" A woman in a crisp navy suit approached. "I'm Tanya Williams from HR. Welcome to King Technologies." During the orientation, Sophie's head spun with information about security protocols, computer systems, and corporate policies. She couldn't help but notice that among the sea of faces in the orientation videos and employee photos, she was one of very few non-black employees. "Your desk is right here," Tanya said, leading her to an open-plan office space. "Marcus will be your team lead." Marcus, a young man with carefully trimmed dreadlocks, barely looked up from his dual monitors. "The new hire from the restaurant?" His tone carried a hint of skepticism that made Sophie's cheeks burn. Throughout the morning, Sophie struggled with what seemed like basic tasks to others. The computer system confused her, and the office jargon might as well have been a foreign language. During the team meeting, she sat quietly, scribbling notes frantically while trying to decode acronyms that everyone else seemed to understand instinctively. "Can you pull up the Q3 projections?" Marcus asked during the meeting. Sophie's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I'm still getting access to the shared drive," she admitted, feeling the weight of stares from around the conference table. "Right," Marcus sighed. "We'll circle back when you're up to speed." During lunch, Sophie sat alone in the break room, watching as groups of colleagues chatted easily about coding challenges and market trends. She overheard snippets of conversation from a nearby table. "I heard she was a waitress," one woman whispered. "Some kind of diversity hire." "Must be nice to skip the usual qualifications," another added. Sophie's sandwich turned to ash in her mouth, but she lifted her chin and focused on her phone, pretending to read emails while actually reviewing the company's organizational chart for the third time. Back at her desk, she tackled the basic training modules with fierce concentration. When the system crashed, she didn't ask for help. Instead, she methodically worked through the troubleshooting steps she'd noted during orientation until she solved the problem herself. "Not bad," Marcus commented, passing by her desk. "Most people just call IT right away." Sophie straightened in her chair. "I'm used to solving problems on my own," she replied, thinking of all the times she'd fixed the restaurant's ancient POS system. By day's end, her head throbbed with new information, but she'd successfully completed her first set of training modules and organized her upcoming schedule. The office had mostly emptied when Tanya stopped by her desk. "How was your first day?" Sophie managed a small smile. "Challenging," she admitted, "but I'm learning." "That's the spirit," Tanya nodded, though her expression held a trace of doubt. As Sophie gathered her things, she glanced around the quiet office. The skepticism of her colleagues hung heavy in the air, but she thought of her mother's medical bills and Elijah's words about recognizing potential. She might not have the same background as her coworkers, but she had something just as valuable: determination. Over the next few weeks, Sophie's keen observation skills, honed from years of reading restaurant patrons, helped her notice the subtle dynamics at King Technologies. Her desk's location near the break room meant she often caught fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Another article about tech companies and diversity. One executive muttered to another as they passed by, tablets in hand. "They're particularly harsh on us this time." Sophie's fingers paused over her keyboard. She opened a new browser tab and searched for recent news about King Technologies. The headlines jumped out at her. King Technologies under fire for homogeneous workforce and tech giant faces mounting pressure over diversity issues. During lunch, she noticed how the cafeteria naturally segregated itself. The few non-black employees like herself stood out starkly in the sea of faces. The realization made her stomach twist as she remembered Elijah's words about seeing potential in her. Had he really seen potential, or had he seen an opportunity to deflect criticism? Later that afternoon, Sophie overheard two HR managers discussing upcoming initiatives. "We need to show concrete progress before the next shareholders' meeting," one said. "The board is getting anxious about these diversity reports." "At least we can point to some recent hires," the other responded, glancing briefly in Sophie's direction. The pieces clicked into place. Sophie's hands clenched under her desk as she processed what this meant. Her hiring, that seemingly miraculous second chance, might have been carefully calculated PR move. But as she worked through her assignments that day, Sophie's initial anger began to shift. She thought about her mother, whose medical treatments were now covered by her new health insurance. She thought about the skills she was learning, the doors that were opening. During the afternoon team meeting, Sophie presented her analysis of customer feedback data, something she'd volunteered to do, drawing on her experience reading customer satisfaction at La Royale. Her insights earned appreciative nods from her colleagues. "Different perspective," Marcus commented. "Hadn't thought about it that way." Walking back to her desk, Sophie overheard another conversation between two junior developers. "Did you see the diversity consultant they're bringing in next week?" one asked. "Yeah, but will anything really change?" the other responded. "We need more than just workshops." Sophie sat at her desk, turning these words over in her mind. Maybe her hiring had been strategic, but that didn't invalidate her abilities or her potential to make real changes. She pulled up the company's internal message board and began drafting a post about her idea for a mentorship program, drawing from her own experience of navigating an unfamiliar corporate world. As the office emptied for the day, Sophie stayed behind, refining her proposal. She might have entered King Technologies as a diversity hire, but she would make sure her impact went far beyond checking a box on a corporate report. The first time Sophie met Clara Johnson was during a company-wide meeting. While other executives sat in the front row checking their phones, Clara stood at the back, actively listening to each presenter. Her elegant gray suit and natural confidence commanded respect without intimidation. After the meeting, Clara approached Sophie. "That was an interesting point you raised about customer feedback patterns," she said, her warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'd love to hear more about your ideas over coffee." The next day, they sat in the building's cafe, steam rising from their cups. Clara listened intently as Sophie explained her observations about customer behavior patterns, drawn from her restaurant experience. "You know," Clara said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, "sometimes the best insights come from unexpected places. I started in customer service myself years ago." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really? But you're so—" She gestured vaguely at Clara's polished appearance. Clara laughed. "Success isn't about where you start. It's about how well you learn and adapt along the way." She leaned forward. "I've been watching you, Sophie. You have potential, but you're holding back. Let me help you navigate this world." Over the next few weeks, Clara became Sophie's guide through the complex maze of corporate culture. They met regularly, sometimes in Clara's office, sometimes during lunch walks around the building. "Remember," Clara advised during one of their sessions, "in meetings, don't wait until you're completely sure before speaking up. If you have an insight, share it. Your perspective is valuable precisely because it's different." Following Clara's advice, Sophie began contributing more in team meetings. When the development team struggled with user interface issues, she drew on her experience serving different types of restaurant customers to suggest improvements. "Think about it like a restaurant menu," Sophie explained to her team. "Some customers want detailed descriptions, others just want pictures. Why not let users choose their preferred interface style?" The team implemented her suggestion, and user satisfaction scores improved noticeably. Clara also helped Sophie understand the unwritten rules of corporate politics. "Notice how Marcus always presents his ideas to small groups first?" Clara pointed out. "He's building support before the big meetings. That's not manipulation, it's smart communication." With Clara's guidance, Sophie learned to navigate the company's social dynamics more effectively. She started organizing informal lunch discussions where team members could share ideas freely, creating bridges between different departments. The turning point came when Sophie identified a pattern in customer complaints that everyone else had missed. Clara encouraged her to present her findings to senior management. "You've done the research," Clara assured her. "Now own your expertise." In the boardroom, Sophie stood before the executive team, including Elijah King himself. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her presentation slides, but Clara's encouraging nod from the corner gave her strength. "Our analysis has been focusing on technical metrics," Sophie began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But when we look at customer feedback through a different lens, one that considers cultural and social factors, a new pattern emerges." As Sophie walked the executives through her analysis, she saw the skeptical expressions gradually transform into interest. Even Elijah, who usually maintained an impassive expression, leaned forward in his chair. When she finished, the room buzzed with discussion. Several executives immediately began planning how to implement her recommendations. Later that day, Clara found Sophie at her desk. "Well done," she said, squeezing Sophie's shoulder. "That's what happens when you stop trying to fit in and start bringing your unique perspective to the table." Sophie looked up at her mentor with grateful eyes. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." "No," Clara corrected her gently. "You had it in you all along. I just helped you see it." Sophie's desk lamp cast a warm glow across her computer screen as she studied columns of data well past normal office hours. The quiet of the evening allowed her to focus completely on the patterns emerging from the numbers. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, making notes and highlighting inefficiencies she'd spotted in the company's operational processes. "There has to be a better way," she muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. Years of managing multiple tables and coordinating with kitchen staff had taught her the value of streamlined systems. She pulled up another spreadsheet, comparing it with the current workflow diagrams. Over the next few weeks, Sophie worked closely with the IT department to develop a software solution. Her practical experience from the restaurant industry helped her design an intuitive interface that would make sense to employees at all levels. "The key is to make it as simple as ordering from a menu," she explained to the development team. "Every action should flow naturally into the next." When the prototype was ready, Sophie demonstrated it to her immediate supervisors. The software automatically tracked and coordinated various operational processes, eliminating hours of manual data entry and reducing the chance of human error. "This could revolutionize how we handle our daily operations," her department head said, clearly impressed. "Let's schedule a presentation for top management." In the main conference room, Sophie stood before the executive team, including Elijah King. Her presentation was clear and confident, backed by solid data and practical examples. "By implementing this automated system," she explained, pointing to her slides, "we can reduce processing time by 60% and cut operational costs by 40%. The room filled with approving murmurs as she demonstrated the software's capabilities. Even the most skeptical executives nodded in appreciation. The implementation phase proved Sophie's estimates correct. Within months, the new system transformed the company's operational efficiency. Teams that had initially resisted the change became its strongest advocates. "I can't believe how much time this saves us," one supervisor commented during a feedback session. "It's like having an extra team member." 3 months after the successful implementation, Sophie received an email requesting her presence in the CEO's office. There, surrounded by the executive team, she was offered a promotion to Director of Operational Innovation, a position created specifically to leverage her unique perspective and skills. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase. That evening, Sophie sat in her mother's hospital room, holding her hand and sharing the good news. "Mom, we can finally afford that specialized treatment Dr. Roberts recommended," she said, tears of joy in her eyes. "Everything's going to be okay now." Her mother's subsequent treatment and recovery proved to be as successful as Sophie's professional journey. The daughter, who had once struggled to make ends meet as a waitress, had transformed not only her own life but also the operations of a major tech company. The corporate event buzzed with energy as employees celebrated the successful implementation of Sophie's project. Crystal champagne flutes clinked, and laughter echoed through the modern event space. Sophie stood near the window, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in warm hues. Despite the accolades and congratulations surrounding her, something felt incomplete. Across the room, Elijah King moved between groups of executives, his presence commanding attention as always. Sophie observed his practiced smile and calculated gestures, remembering that fateful night outside La Royale. The question that had nagged at her for months grew stronger. The next morning, Sophie sent a carefully worded email requesting a private meeting with Elijah. His response came within minutes, scheduling her for that afternoon. At precisely 3 o'clock, Sophie entered Elijah's corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but the space felt somehow smaller than she'd imagined. "Congratulations again on the project's success," Elijah said, gesturing for her to sit. "What can I do for you?" Sophie took a deep breath, straightening her spine. "I need to ask you something that's been on my mind since I started here." She paused, meeting his steady gaze. "Was I hired just to fill a diversity quota?" The question hung in the air between them. Elijah leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. "The truth?" he said finally. "Yes, the company's lack of diversity was a factor in my decision to hire you. We were under scrutiny and changes needed to be made." He held up a hand as Sophie's jaw tightened. "But that's not the whole story." He stood and walked to the window. "That night at the restaurant, you showed something rare. When you slapped me, which was completely inappropriate by the way, you demonstrated not just courage but conviction. Then, watching you explain your situation, I saw resourcefulness and determination." Turning back to face her, he continued, "The diversity issue opened the door, Sophie, but your potential is what made me extend the offer. I knew you'd either sink or swim, and you've done far more than stay afloat." Sophie absorbed his words, feeling a complex mix of emotions. So it wasn't just about appearances? "If it were just about appearances, I would have hired someone with more experience in tech," Elijah replied. "I took a calculated risk on you because I saw someone who could bring real value to this company. The diversity angle simply made the timing right." Sophie nodded slowly, appreciating his candor even as she processed the implications. The answer wasn't entirely satisfying, but it was honest. "Thank you for your honesty," she said, rising from her chair. Their eyes met in a moment of mutual understanding, not quite warm, but respectful. "Keep proving me right," Elijah said as she reached the door. Sophie left the office with her shoulders straight but her mind churning. The truth was both better and worse than she'd imagined, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. The success she'd achieved was real, but knowing that her opportunity had been partially influenced by corporate optics left her with lingering questions about her place in the company. Sophie's fingers flew across her keyboard, her eyes scanning through columns of data on her monitor. The soft glow of her desk lamp cast shadows across her face as she reviewed the quarterly reports. Something wasn't adding up. "That can't be right," she muttered, double-checking the numbers. The discrepancies were subtle, tiny variations in the development costs that most people would overlook. But Sophie had spent months learning these systems inside and out, and these irregularities stood out like red flags. She pulled up another set of files, comparing them side by side. The pattern became clearer, small amounts of resources being redirected, cleverly hidden within legitimate project expenses. Someone was siphoning company assets, and they knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Sophie's heart raced as she dug deeper. The trail led her through various departments, but seemed to concentrate around the new quantum computing division, the company's most ambitious and secretive project. "Hey, what are you still doing here?" Sophie jumped at the voice. It was Marcus from IT security making his evening rounds. "Oh, just catching up on some work," she said, trying to sound casual. "Actually, Marcus, could you help me with something? I need access to some older server logs." Marcus raised an eyebrow but moved to help. As they dug through the digital archives, Sophie's suspicions grew stronger. The patterns suggested more than simple theft. This looked like systematic data extraction, the kind used in corporate espionage. Over the next few days, Sophie created a private folder on her secure drive, methodically documenting everything she found. The implications were staggering. If she was right, someone was stealing not just money, but critical research data that could devastate the company if it fell into competitors' hands. She thought about going directly to Elijah with her suspicions, but held back. She needed more than theories. She needed solid proof. The memory of their last conversation about her role in the company made her extra cautious. This had to be handled perfectly. Sophie began staying late regularly, using the quiet hours to conduct her investigation. She created a detailed spreadsheet tracking suspicious activities, cross-referencing them with employee schedules and project timelines. The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. One evening, as she was examining some particularly suspicious code fragments, she noticed something odd in the access logs. Several employees were logging in during off hours, accessing files that seemed unrelated to their projects. She started mapping these incidents, looking for patterns. Setting up her workspace for another late night, Sophie arranged 3 monitors to display different data streams. On one screen, she tracked current system activities. On another, she analyzed historical logs. The third displayed her growing collection of evidence. "Time to find out what's really going on," she whispered to herself, settling in for what promised to be a long night of digital detective work. The truth was in these numbers somewhere, and she was determined to find it. Sophie's investigation took on a new intensity as she methodically pieced together the digital breadcrumbs. Her desk became a command center of sorts, with multiple screens displaying various data streams and analysis tools. The office's evening silence was broken only by the soft tapping of her keyboard and occasional rustling of papers. "Miss Martinez?" A young IT intern approached her desk hesitantly. "I pulled those access logs you requested." "Thanks, Jake." Sophie accepted the flash drive, careful to keep her expression neutral despite her racing heart. These logs could confirm her growing suspicions about after-hours network activity. As she dove into the new data, patterns emerged that made her stomach clench. The unauthorized access wasn't random. It followed a sophisticated schedule that coincided with major project milestones. More disturbing was how the timing aligned perfectly with competitor announcements of surprisingly similar technologies. Sophie cross-referenced employee schedules with the suspicious network activities. Her hands trembled slightly as familiar names began appearing in her analysis. These weren't low-level employees making rookie mistakes. These were trusted senior executives, people who had been with the company for years. Working methodically through personnel files and project documentation, she created a detailed timeline of events. Each new piece of evidence pointed to a coordinated effort to extract valuable research data. The quantum computing project seemed to be their primary target, but there were traces of infiltration in other departments too. Her anxiety mounted as she realized the scale of the betrayal. These weren't just random security breaches. This was a calculated operation run by people who knew exactly what they were doing. People who sat in corner offices and attended board meetings. One night, while cross-checking some particularly suspicious server logs, Sophie noticed an unusual pattern in the data transfers. Following the digital trail, she found herself looking at encrypted communications that originated from Executive Vice President Charles Morrison's office. Her heart nearly stopped. Morrison was one of the company's most respected leaders, someone who had helped build the organization from its early days. The evidence was clear, though. His private server had been used to transfer massive amounts of proprietary data to external locations during off hours. Sophie's fear gave way to a steely determination. The magnitude of this betrayal, perpetrated by those entrusted with the company's future, filled her with resolve. She began meticulously documenting everything she had discovered, creating backup copies and securing them in multiple locations. This wasn't just about protecting her job anymore. This was about doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. She organized her findings into a comprehensive report, making sure every accusation was backed by solid evidence. The faces of all the honest employees whose work was being stolen flashed through her mind, strengthening her resolve. As she compiled the last pieces of evidence against Morrison and his collaborators, Sophie felt a strange calm settle over her. The path ahead would be difficult, but there was no turning back now. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Sophie's hands shook as she stared at her computer screen, the decrypted emails laying bare a calculated plan to sell the company's most valuable research to their biggest competitor. The messages detailed meeting locations, payment arrangements, and specific technical data that had been targeted for theft. Her office felt suddenly cold and unwelcoming as she scrolled through the evidence. Names of senior executives appeared throughout the correspondence, confirming her worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. But one detail made her blood run cold. An email thread mentioning regular updates being passed through our friend in operations. Clara worked in operations. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had with her mentor. Clara had always seemed so genuine, so invested in Sophie's success. She remembered their lunch meetings, the late-night strategy sessions, the way Clara had guided her through corporate politics with wisdom and patience. But now, certain moments took on a different meaning, like when Clara had asked detailed questions about Sophie's quantum computing project, or her casual mentions of competing firms' progress in similar areas. At the time, it had seemed like normal shop talk. Now Sophie wasn't so sure. She pulled up Clara's personnel file, scanning it with new eyes. Nothing seemed obviously suspicious. A steady rise through the ranks, consistent performance reviews, all the hallmarks of a dedicated employee. But the timing of certain promotions aligned uncomfortably well with major data breaches she'd uncovered. The evidence wasn't conclusive. Clara's name never appeared directly in any of the incriminating communications. But there were too many coincidences, too many subtle connections that Sophie couldn't ignore. Opening her desk drawer, Sophie removed a small notebook and began documenting every interaction with Clara that now seemed suspicious. She needed to be methodical, to separate facts from paranoid speculation. The weight of suspicion pressed heavily on her shoulders as she wrote. She thought about confiding in someone from the IT security team, but quickly dismissed the idea. Until she knew exactly who was involved, sharing her suspicions could alert the conspirators. She had to maintain absolute secrecy. Looking at Clara's smiling face in a recent team photo on her desk, Sophie felt a deep sense of isolation settle over her. The woman who had been her strongest ally might be part of the very conspiracy she was trying to expose. She carefully removed the photo and placed it face down in her drawer. Sophie organized her findings into separate encrypted folders, making sure to include a section dedicated to Clara's potential involvement. She would watch and wait, gathering more evidence before making any moves. The thought of confronting her mentor made her stomach churn, but she knew she couldn't act without absolute certainty. Sophie arrived at work early the next morning, her mind still churning with questions about Clara's possible involvement in the conspiracy. As she logged into her computer, a notification popped up immediately, an urgent meeting request from corporate security for 9 a.m. Her heart skipped a beat. The security conference room felt cold and sterile. 3 stern faces greeted her: James Chen, the head of security, Patricia Walsh from HR, and another security officer she didn't recognize. Their expressions made her stomach tighten. "Ms. Martinez," James began, his voice clipped and professional. "We've detected unauthorized data transfers from our secure servers occurring over the past 3 weeks. The access logs show your credentials were used." Sophie's mouth went dry. "That's impossible, I haven't—" James turned his laptop around, showing her screen after screen of damning evidence. Timestamps, access logs, and file transfers, all linked to her login credentials. "These records show systematic extraction of proprietary data," James continued, "including project specifications from quantum computing and several other restricted areas." "This is wrong," Sophie protested, her voice shaking. "Someone must have planted this. I've been investigating." "Ms. Martinez," Patricia interrupted, "these are serious allegations. We have digital signatures, timestamps, and clear evidence of data being transferred to external drives using your authentication codes. Sophie's mind raced. The conspirators must have discovered her investigation and moved to discredit her before she could expose them. The elegance of their plan struck her. Who would believe her accusations now? "I need to explain," Sophie said, leaning forward. "I've uncovered evidence of corporate espionage within the company. If you'll just let me show you—" "Your access has been revoked," James stated flatly. "You are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Please surrender your company ID and devices." Sophie's hands trembled as she handed over her laptop and badge. Patricia slid a document across the table. Official notice of her suspension. The words blurred before her eyes. "Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal belongings," Patricia added. "You are not to access any company systems or contact any employees during the investigation." In a daze, Sophie followed the security officer to her desk. Colleagues watched with curious expressions as she packed her few personal items into a cardboard box. The photo of her mother, now healthy after her successful surgery, seemed to mock her from its frame. Walking through the lobby, past the sleek modern art and gleaming surfaces that had once represented opportunity, Sophie felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. Someone had orchestrated this perfectly, turning her own investigation against her. As the glass doors closed behind her, she stepped into the bright morning sunshine, suddenly uncertain of what would come next. Elijah King stood at his office window, hands clasped behind his back as he processed the morning's developments. The news of Sophie's suspension had reached him moments ago, and something about it didn't sit right. The city sprawled before him, a maze of glass and steel that usually brought him clarity, but today it offered no answers. He turned back to his desk, where Sophie's employee file lay open. Her trajectory within the company had been remarkable, from the waitress who dared to stand up to him to becoming one of their most innovative team members. The automated processing system she'd developed had saved the company millions. It wasn't just about the numbers, though. She'd shown an integrity that was rare in the corporate world. "Something's not adding up," he muttered, picking up his secure phone. His finger hovered over the keypad before dialing a number he rarely used. "Marcus, Elijah King here, I need your services." He spoke in measured tones to the private investigator. "This needs to be handled with absolute discretion. No connection to me or the company." Marcus's gravelly voice came through the speaker. "I understand, Mr. King. What's the situation?" "Possible corporate espionage, but I need you to look at it from all angles, both the alleged perpetrator and those making the accusations." Elijah's jaw tightened. "I'm sending you the details now. Priority level 1. After ending the call, Elijah sank into his leather chair. On his desk sat photos from the last company gathering. Clara, his longtime friend and colleague, stood next to Sophie, both smiling. He'd trusted Clara for 15 years. She'd helped build this company from the ground up. The thought that she might be involved in something underhanded seemed impossible, yet he couldn't ignore the knot in his stomach. He pulled up Sophie's security clearance logs on his computer. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. In his experience, perfection often masked deception. But whose? His intercom buzzed. "Mr. King, the board is waiting for you in the conference room. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." He needed these moments to compose himself. The weight of what he was setting in motion pressed heavily on his shoulders. If his suspicions were correct, he would have to confront people he'd considered family. If he was wrong, he might destroy valuable relationships for nothing. Elijah stood and straightened his tie, his reflection in the window showing a man prepared to make difficult choices. The city skyline stretched out behind him, a testament to the empire he'd built. He'd sacrificed too much to let anyone threaten it now, no matter who they were. His gaze hardened with resolution. The truth would come out regardless of where it led or who it hurt. He owed that much to his company, and to Sophie. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her laptop and documents on the conference room table. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the blinds, creating strips of light across the polished surface. She'd chosen this particular room because it was far from the main office areas, offering the privacy this confrontation needed. The door opened and Clara walked in with her usual confident stride, Sophie, what's this urgent matter you needed to discuss? Her smile faded as she noticed Sophie's serious expression. Please sit down, Clara. Sophie's voice was steady despite her racing heart. I've discovered something that we need to address. Clara settled into a chair, her professional demeanor still intact. You're making me nervous, Sophie. What's going on? Sophie opened her laptop and turned it toward Clara. These are encrypted emails I managed to decrypt. They show a pattern of corporate data being leaked to our competitors. She paused, watching Clara's face carefully. And there are traces that lead back to you. The color drained from Clara's face. Her hands, usually so steady, began to fidget with her bracelet. Sophie, I can explain. Please do, Sophie said, her voice softer now. Because the Clara I know, the woman who mentored me and believed in me, wouldn't do this willingly. Clara's professional facade crumbled, her shoulders sagged, and tears welled up in her eyes. They have my family, Sophie, she whispered, her voice breaking. They approached me 6 months ago with photos of my children at school, my husband at work. They knew everything about our routines, our vulnerabilities. Sophie felt her anger dissolving into compassion. Who are they, Clara? A group within the company, working with our biggest competitor. They needed someone with my access level. Clara wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. I thought about going to Elijah, but they made it clear what would happen if I did. Sophie reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. You're not alone anymore. I've gathered evidence, and with your help, we can expose them without putting your family at risk. Clara looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. How can you be sure we can protect them? Because we'll be smart about this, Sophie said, pulling out a notepad. We'll document everything, create fail-safes. We'll build an airtight case before anyone makes a move. Clara straightened in her chair, some of her old strength returning. They're careful, Sophie, very careful. But I know things, details I've been too afraid to compile until now. Then let's start there, Sophie said, opening a new document on her laptop. Together, we can piece this puzzle together. They spent the next hour mapping out what they knew, Clara's insider knowledge filling crucial gaps in Sophie's investigation. The tension in the room gradually shifted from fear to determined focus as they worked. We'll need to be extremely cautious, Clara said, reviewing their notes. They're watching me closely. Sophie nodded, her expression resolute. We'll communicate through the old project management system, the one they decommissioned last month. I can reactivate a private channel. Smart, Clara agreed, a glimmer of her mentoring pride showing through. We should establish a regular meeting pattern that won't raise suspicions, perhaps under the guise of a mentorship program revival? The two women looked at each other, their shared purpose creating a new bond of trust. The path ahead was dangerous, but they were no longer facing it alone. In the dimly lit conference room, Sophie and Clara huddled over a laptop, their faces illuminated by the screen's blue glow. They had chosen this particular room because it was one of the few spaces in the building without network connectivity, perfect for sensitive discussions. If we plant the false data here, Sophie pointed to a diagram on the screen, it'll look like an accidental exposure of next quarter's financial projections. Clara nodded, her years of experience evident in her thoughtful expression. The numbers need to be convincing but not accurate, just enticing enough to trigger action. The door opened quietly and Elijah slipped in, his usual commanding presence subdued for the sake of discretion. He carried a small USB drive, which he placed carefully on the table. This contains everything you'll need, he said in a low voice. The IT security team has created a sealed network environment. When they access the data, we'll have them. Sophie picked up the drive, turning it over in her hands. And you're sure the surveillance system is undetectable? State of the art, Elijah confirmed. Invisible to standard security scans. We'll catch every keystroke, every file transfer. Clara pulled out a notepad, her handwriting neat despite her nervous energy. I've identified the most likely access points they'll use. Based on their previous patterns, they tend to move data during system maintenance windows, which is why we'll schedule a fake maintenance window for tomorrow night. Sophie added, pulling up a calendar. It'll give them the perfect opportunity. Elijah reviewed their plan, his expression grave but approving. The security team is ready. They'll monitor everything from a separate location to avoid raising suspicion. Sophie began uploading the falsified data to the designated server, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. The fake financial projections were masterfully crafted, showing just enough promise to be irresistible to their competitors. Remember, Clara cautioned, they'll verify the data's path. It needs to look like it came through the proper channels. Sophie nodded, adding the appropriate digital signatures and timestamps. Done. The trail leads back through all the expected departments. Elijah checked his watch. The maintenance window is scheduled for 11 p.m. tomorrow. The security team will be in position by 10:30. They reviewed the plan one final time, each person knowing their role. Clara would maintain her usual routine to avoid arousing suspicion. Sophie would monitor the data access logs remotely. Elijah would coordinate with the security team from his home office, maintaining plausible deniability. As the last details fell into place, Sophie initiated the final sequence that would make the false data visible to those who knew where to look. The trap was set. "Now we wait," Clara whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen showing the data's location. Already they could see subtle probes testing the server's defenses, the conspirators' automated systems discovering their bait. The three of them watched in tense silence as the first serious attempts to access the data began. Their plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. In the dimly lit control room, Sophie and Clara sat side by side, their eyes fixed on multiple screens displaying various security feeds and data logs. The room hummed with the soft whir of computers and the occasional whispered exchange between them. "Movement detected," Sophie murmured, pointing to a screen showing unusual network activity. "They're starting their approach." Clara leaned forward, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. "I see it. They're using the maintenance window exactly as we predicted." The screens flickered with increasing activity as the conspirators began their attempt to access the planted data. Sophie's heart raced as she watched their careful progress through the system's security layers. "They're taking the bait," Clara whispered, her voice tense with anticipation. "Look at how they're navigating straight to the target folder." Suddenly, all activity ceased. The screens showed the conspirators' rapid retreat from the system, their digital footprints vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. "No, no, no!" Sophie exclaimed, frantically typing commands to track their withdrawal. "Something spooked them!" Clara's face paled as she pulled up the system logs. "There was an internal security alert, but that's impossible. We disabled all standard alerts for this operation." Sophie's stomach dropped as the implications became clear. Someone had to have manually triggered that warning, someone who knew about our operation. The control room door burst open as several members of the security team rushed in, their faces showing confusion and concern. Questions flew around the room. Who authorized that alert? Where did it originate from? How did they know? Clara pulled up the alert's source code, her expression growing more troubled. "This warning came from within our secure network. Someone with high-level access sent it." Sophie felt the weight of suspicious glances from the security team members. The operation's failure cast doubt on everyone involved, including herself and Clara. Minutes later, Sophie's phone buzzed with messages from company leadership demanding immediate explanations. The carefully planned sting operation had not only failed, but had also exposed a deeper breach of trust within their own ranks. As they sat in the now silent control room, surrounded by screens showing their failed operation, Sophie and Clara exchanged worried looks. Their attempt to expose the conspiracy had instead revealed an even more troubling truth. Someone they trusted had betrayed them. The security team began collecting logs and evidence, their earlier camaraderie replaced with professional detachment. Every person in the room had become a potential suspect, and the atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken accusations. Sophie watched as senior executives filed into a nearby conference room, their faces grave. Through the glass walls, she could see them gesturing at documents and speaking in heated tones. The failed operation had clearly triggered a crisis of confidence in the company's leadership. Clara sat quietly at her station, methodically documenting the night's events, though her usual composure showed cracks of worry. The trust she had worked so hard to rebuild was once again in jeopardy. As word of the operation's failure spread through the secure channels, Sophie could feel the company's carefully maintained structure of trust beginning to crumble. What had started as an attempt to expose corporate espionage had instead revealed a far more insidious threat, one that came from within their own ranks. Sophie sat rigidly in her chair facing the semicircle of board members in the expansive conference room. Their faces, illuminated by the morning sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, showed varying degrees of skepticism and concern. "Ms. Martinez," began Richard Thompson, the head of the board, "explain to us how this operation went so catastrophically wrong." Sophie's throat felt dry as she responded, "The operation was proceeding as planned until an unauthorized alert warned the conspirators. This suggests someone with high-level access compromised our efforts." Murmurs rippled through the board members. A senior executive leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "And how do we know you weren't involved in triggering that alert yourself?" "That's an unfair accusation," Elijah interjected from his seat at the head of the table. "Ms. Martinez has shown nothing but dedication to this company." "With all due respect, Mr. King," another board member spoke up, "your judgment regarding Ms. Martinez has been questionable from the start. Her unusual hiring circumstances? Her hiring circumstances are irrelevant to the current situation," Elijah cut in firmly. "What matters is that we have a serious security breach that requires thorough investigation." Sophie felt the weight of suspicious glances from around the table. Clara, seated in the corner taking notes, caught her eye with a sympathetic look. "The board suggests an immediate internal investigation," Thompson announced, shuffling through some papers, "including a complete audit of Ms. Martinez's communications and activities." Sophie's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. "I welcome any investigation. I have nothing to hide." "Additionally," Thompson continued, "we recommend suspending all of Ms. Martinez's current projects pending—" "That would be premature," Elijah interrupted. "We need her expertise to track down the real perpetrators. Suspending her would only hamper our investigation." The board members exchanged glances, clearly torn between their respect for Elijah and their doubts about Sophie. "Perhaps a compromise," Elijah suggested. "Ms. Martinez continues her work under supervision while the investigation proceeds. We can't afford to lose momentum on this security breach." After several tense moments of discussion among the board members, Thompson nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Ms. Martinez will continue her duties under strict oversight. But make no mistake, any hint of suspicious activity will result in immediate termination." Sophie sat through the remainder of the meeting, maintaining her professional demeanor despite feeling increasingly isolated. Each question seemed designed to trip her up, to expose some hidden guilt. But Elijah's steady presence and occasional interventions helped her maintain her composure. As the meeting drew to a close, Sophie gathered her materials, feeling the weight of distrustful stares. The board members filed out, leaving her with a clear message. One wrong move would end her career at the company. Yet despite the hostility she'd faced, Sophie's determination remained unshaken. With Elijah's continued support and Clara's alliance, she knew she had a chance to expose the true perpetrators and clear her name. She left the boardroom with her head held high, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in finding the mole. Back in her office, Sophie pulled the blinds shut and dimmed the lights. Clara sat across from her desk. Both women hunched over their laptops as they combed through security logs from the failed sting operation. "Look at this," Sophie pointed to her screen. "There's an anomaly in the access patterns just minutes before the alert went out." Clara leaned in, her glasses reflecting the blue light. "The login credentials, they're from the executive suite. They spent hours cross-referencing employee movements captured on security cameras with the digital footprints left in the system." Sophie's desk became cluttered with sticky notes and hastily scribbled observations. "Wait," Clara suddenly straightened. "Play that footage again." Sophie rewound the security video. On screen, a familiar figure walked purposefully through the executive corridor at exactly 3:42 p.m., just 2 minutes before the warning alert was triggered. "That's James Wheeler," Sophie whispered, her stomach dropping. "Elijah's chief strategist." And his closest friend for 20 years, Clara added, her voice equally low. They built this company together. Sophie sat back, running her hands through her hair. James Wheeler wasn't just any executive. He was practically Elijah's right hand. His office was just down the hall from Elijah's, and his influence extended into every major company decision. Look at his pattern of movement, Clara pointed out. He accessed the secure server room right before the alert, then immediately left the building claiming a family emergency. Sophie pulled up Wheeler's communication logs. There are encrypted messages sent from his terminal to an outside server. The timestamps match perfectly. They spent the next hour building their case, documenting every piece of evidence. Wheeler's involvement became increasingly clear, from suspicious financial transactions to irregular meeting patterns with known competitors. This is going to devastate Elijah, Sophie said, organizing their findings into a secure folder. Wheeler's been like a brother to him. Clara nodded grimly. But we have to tell him. The evidence is overwhelming. Sophie stared at the folder on her screen, containing proof that would shatter a decades-long friendship and potentially reshape the entire company. Her hand hovered over the mouse, her heart pounding as she prepared to send the evidence to a secure backup location. The weight of what she was about to do pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing someone who had helped build the company from the ground up, someone Elijah trusted implicitly. "Are you ready for this?" Clara asked softly, seeing the conflict on Sophie's face. Sophie took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "I have to be. The company's future depends on it." She gathered the printed evidence into a folder, her hands steady despite the gravity of what she was about to do. The walk to Elijah's office would be the longest of her career, but she knew it had to be done. Sophie sat in her dimly lit office, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence one final time. Each document, each log entry, each surveillance image painted a clearer picture of James Wheeler's betrayal. Her computer screen cast a pale glow across her face as she scrutinized financial records, showing his careful manipulation of company resources. A pattern emerged that made her stomach turn. Wheeler had orchestrated events far beyond what they'd initially suspected. In a secured email thread she'd decrypted, Wheeler discussed with board members how hiring Sophie, a non-black employee, would make Elijah appear weak and inconsistent with his company values. "He planned this from the beginning," Sophie murmured, her fingers trembling slightly as she organized the documents. The evidence revealed Wheeler's masterful manipulation, questioning Elijah's judgment in private board meetings, subtly undermining his authority, and positioning himself as the natural successor. He'd created artificial crises only to solve them, building his reputation while diminishing Elijah's. Sophie gathered her courage and walked to Elijah's office, clutching the folder containing proof of his friend's betrayal. His assistant nodded her through, and Sophie found him standing by the window, silhouetted against the city skyline. "Mr. King," she said softly, "I need to show you something." Elijah turned, his expression guarded. Sophie laid out the evidence piece by piece, starting with the encrypted emails and ending with the surveillance footage. She explained how Wheeler had manipulated her hiring, using her as a pawn in his larger scheme. "He knew hiring me would cause controversy," Sophie explained, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He wanted to use me to damage your reputation with the board and employees." Elijah remained silent as he examined each document, his jaw tightening with every new revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with pain. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years of friendship, and all this time. "I'm so sorry," Sophie said, watching him struggle with the weight of the betrayal. Elijah sat heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Don't apologize, Sophie. You've done exactly what I hired you to do. Protect this company's interests, no matter the personal cost." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude despite his pain. "Thank you for having the courage to bring this to me." They spent the next hour planning their response, discussing how to handle Wheeler's removal while protecting the company's stability. Despite his personal anguish, Elijah remained focused on the task at hand. "We'll need to move carefully," he said, making notes. "Wheeler has too many connections, too much influence to handle this recklessly." Sophie nodded, relieved to see Elijah's strategic mind engaging with the problem. The betrayal had wounded him deeply, but it hadn't broken him. Sophie entered the high-security conference room, her heart steady despite the gravity of what was about to unfold. James Wheeler sat at the far end of the polished table, his confident posture reflecting years of corporate authority. The recording device, carefully hidden in her blazer pocket, felt like a heavy weight against her chest. "Sophie, I hope this won't take long. I have a board meeting in an hour," Wheeler said, his tone carrying that familiar note of condescension. "I'll be brief, Mr. Wheeler. I wanted to discuss some concerning patterns I've noticed in our internal audit." Sophie kept her voice professional as she opened her laptop. Wheeler leaned back, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Patterns? Well, you've certainly proven yourself quite observant since joining us. Though I must say, your presence here has created its own interesting patterns." "How so?" Sophie asked, maintaining eye contact. "Let's just say certain decisions, even well-intentioned ones, can have unexpected consequences for a company's reputation." Wheeler's smugness grew more apparent. "Elijah's choice to hire you, for instance, quite controversial among our more traditional board members." Sophie nodded slowly. "And you would know all about that, wouldn't you, since you orchestrated the whole thing?" Wheeler's smirk faltered slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "The encrypted emails, Mr. Wheeler. The ones discussing how my hiring would make Elijah look weak. The careful manipulation of board members' opinions. The manufactured crises." Sophie began laying out printed copies of emails and financial records. "It's quite impressive, actually. How methodically you planned everything." Wheeler's face hardened. "Those are confidential documents. You had no right." "I had every right once I discovered the corporate espionage." Sophie's voice remained calm. "You've been playing a long game, haven't you? Using me as a pawn to undermine Elijah while positioning yourself as his successor." A cold smile spread across Wheeler's face. "You really think you can prove any of this? I've spent decades building my position here. You're just a diversity hire who got lucky." "That's where you're wrong," Sophie replied. "I was hired because Elijah saw potential in me. The same potential that helped me uncover your schemes." Wheeler's composure cracked slightly. "You know what? You're right. I did orchestrate your hiring. I did manipulate the board. And I did it because this company needs stronger leadership than Elijah can provide. He's too soft, too focused on his precious diversity initiatives instead of pure profit. Someone needed to show everyone his weaknesses." "And that someone was you?" "Of course it was me." Wheeler's voice rose with pride. "I've been the real power behind this company's success for years. Elijah just takes the credit. I deserve that CEO position, and I'll get it, one way or another." Sophie stood slowly, gathering her documents. "Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. That's exactly what I needed to hear." Wheeler's face suddenly drained of color as realization dawned. "You didn't—" Sophie reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out the recording device. Wheeler's eyes fixed on it, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "You manipulative little—" "Goodbye, Mr. Wheeler," Sophie cut him off, walking toward the door with the evidence secured. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for the handle, but her voice remained steady. "Someone from security will be here shortly." The boardroom buzzed with tension as executives filed in for the emergency meeting. The mahogany table stretched the length of the room, its surface reflecting the concerned faces of board members and stakeholders. Elijah King sat at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence now tinged with gravity. Sophie stood near the presentation screen, her tablet ready with the damning evidence. Her hands were steady, though her heart raced as she watched Wheeler take his seat, his face a mask of practiced confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "we've called this meeting to address a serious breach of trust within our company." Sophie stepped forward, connecting her tablet to the display. "Over the past months, we've uncovered evidence of systematic manipulation and corporate espionage." Her voice carried clearly across the room as she began presenting the email trails, financial records, and finally, the recorded confession. Wheeler's voice filled the room through the speakers, his earlier boasting now a self-damning testimony. Several board members gasped as Wheeler's admission of manipulating Sophie's hiring and undermining Elijah played out. Others shook their heads in disbelief, shooting dark looks at Wheeler, who had begun to shift uncomfortably in his seat. "This is outrageous," one board member exclaimed, slamming his hand on the table. "The level of deception." Another board member, an elderly woman who had served the company for decades, turned to Wheeler with disappointment etched on her face. "How could you betray this company's trust so thoroughly?" Wheeler stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Everything I did was for the company's benefit. Elijah's soft leadership—" "That's enough, James," Elijah interrupted, his voice steel-edged. "Security is waiting outside." Two security officers entered the room. Wheeler's face reddened as they approached, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "You'll regret this," he spat, but his threats rang hollow as he was escorted from the room. The board quickly moved to formalize Wheeler's immediate termination, along with several other executives implicated in the conspiracy. The vote was unanimous. "Ms. Martinez," the board chairwoman spoke, turning to Sophie, "your diligence and courage in uncovering this plot are commendable. You've proven yourself a valuable asset to this company." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. The same board members who had once viewed her with skepticism now regarded her with respect and appreciation. Elijah stood addressing the room. "Sophie's actions have protected this company from severe damage. Her integrity and determination exemplify the leadership qualities we value." As Wheeler and his conspirators were escorted from the building, Sophie watched from the boardroom windows. She felt Elijah's presence beside her, and they exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The ordeal had transformed their relationship from one of uncertainty to one of deep professional respect. "Well done," Elijah said quietly, and in those two words lay the acknowledgement of everything they had overcome together. The company's main auditorium hummed with anticipation as employees filed in for the all-hands meeting. Sophie stood at the podium, her posture confident yet approachable, a far cry from her first nervous days at the company. The recent events had changed not just the company's structure, but Sophie herself. "Thank you all for coming today," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the speakers. "The recent revelations have shown us where we need to improve. Today, I want to share our path forward." Behind her, the screen displayed the first slide of her presentation. "We're implementing a 3-tier system of checks and balances," Sophie explained, outlining the new governance structure. "Every major decision will now require multiple levels of verification, with clear documentation at each step." Heads nodded throughout the audience as Sophie detailed the new security protocols. "We're establishing an anonymous whistleblower hotline, managed by an independent third party. No employee should ever fear retaliation for speaking up about misconduct." She moved on to discuss the new audit schedule. Quarterly internal audits will be supplemented by biannual external reviews. Every department will participate in these transparency initiatives. The department heads in the front row leaned forward as Sophie outlined their specific responsibilities. "Each division will have a dedicated compliance officer," she continued. "They'll report directly to our new ethics committee, which will include representatives from all levels of the company." Questions came from the audience, and Sophie addressed each one with clarity and patience. The employees' relief was palpable. Finally, someone was taking concrete action to prevent future corruption. "These changes aren't just about preventing wrongdoing," Sophie emphasized. "They're about building a culture of trust and integrity that we can all be proud of." As she concluded her presentation, the applause was spontaneous and genuine. Looking out over the sea of faces, Sophie saw hope and renewed commitment in their eyes. She remembered her own first day, filled with uncertainty and doubt, and marveled at how far she'd come. The transformation from that overwhelmed waitress to this confident leader hadn't been easy. But standing there, Sophie knew it had been worth every challenge. Her vision for a transparent, ethical company was no longer just a dream. It was becoming reality. Sophie stepped through the familiar glass doors of La Royale, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The crystal chandeliers cast the same warm glow she remembered from her days as a waitress, but everything felt different now. Her designer suit and confident stride were a stark contrast to the humble uniform she once wore. The maitre d' greeted her with a respectful bow. "Ms. Martinez, your private dining room is ready." As she followed him through the main dining area, memories flooded back. She passed the very table where she had served Elijah that fateful night. A small smile played on her lips as she remembered the napkin toss, the slap, and the unexpected opportunity that followed. The private dining room was elegantly set for her team. Crystal glasses sparkled under soft lighting, and fresh flowers adorned the center of the table. Sophie ran her hand along the back of one of the chairs, taking in the irony of hosting a celebration dinner where she once served others. Soon the room filled with animated chatter as her team arrived. Clara entered with a warm smile, followed by Elijah, who nodded appreciatively at Sophie's choice of venue. The rest of the team filtered in, their excitement palpable. "You all might not know this," Sophie began as everyone settled in, "but this restaurant is where my journey with our company started." She gestured toward Elijah with a hint of amusement. "Right over there, I served Mr. King his last meal as a customer." "And slapped him," Elijah added dryly, drawing surprised gasps and laughter from the team. Clara leaned forward, eyes twinkling. "I've heard rumors about that night, but never the full story." As they were served their appetizers, Sophie shared the tale, describing her desperate circumstances, the mix-up with orders, and the moment that changed everything. The team listened intently, seeing their leader in a new light. "It's surreal," Sophie admitted, looking around at the familiar decor. "I used to balance plates right there, worried about making ends meet. Now," she gestured to her team, her voice filled with pride. When everyone's glasses were filled, Sophie stood, raising her crystal flute, the same type she had once served to others. "To our team's resilience," she began, her voice clear and confident. "To overcoming challenges, uncovering truth, and building something we can all be proud of." The team raised their glasses in response, the crystal catching the light just as Sophie's eyes shimmered with emotion. The moment perfectly encapsulated her journey from waitress to leader, from struggle to triumph, all within the walls of La Royale. The elegant private dining room buzzed with conversation as servers gracefully presented course after course. Sophie sat between Clara and Elijah, watching her team interact with genuine warmth. The formal barriers that usually existed in the office had melted away in the comfortable setting of La Royale. "I remember my first week at the company," David from IT shared, cutting into his perfectly cooked steak. "I was so intimidated by all the talent around me that I nearly quit on day 3. Clara nodded sympathetically. "We've all had those moments of doubt. When I first started, I was the only woman in senior management. Every meeting felt like walking into a lion's den." "How did you handle it?" asked Sarah, one of the newer team members. "One day at a time," Clara replied, her eyes twinkling. "And by proving my worth through results rather than words. Eventually, respect follows naturally." Elijah set down his wine glass and leaned forward. "I still remember the board meeting where Clara completely transformed our approach to client retention. She stood her ground against 6 very vocal opponents and proved them all wrong within 3 months." The table listened intently as Elijah continued. "It taught me an important lesson about listening to different perspectives, even when, perhaps especially when, they challenge your own assumptions." "Speaking of challenges," Marcus chimed in, "Sophie, how did you manage to stay so composed during the recent crisis? The pressure must have been enormous." Sophie exchanged a knowing look with Clara before responding. "Honestly, it helped that I'd already faced my share of difficult situations. When you've worked in food service, dealing with corporate politics feels manageable." Laughter rippled around the table, and more stories began to flow. Junior team members shared their experiences of growth, while veterans recalled pivotal moments that shaped their careers. Each story added another layer of understanding and appreciation among the group. "I think what strikes me most," Clara observed, looking around the table, is how each person here has contributed something unique to our success. We're stronger because of our differences, not in spite of them. The conversation continued to weave between serious reflections and lighter moments, punctuated by the clinking of glasses and the quiet efficiency of the serving staff. Through it all, Sophie noticed how her team had transformed from mere colleagues into something more, people who truly understood and supported each other. As dessert was served, Elijah shared a rare personal story about his early days building the company. "There were nights I slept in my office," he admitted. "Not because I had to, but because I was too excited about what we were creating to go home." "That passion is contagious," one team member commented. "It's what drew many of us here in the first place." The warmth of shared experiences filled the room as more stories emerged. Tales of late-night coding sessions, breakthrough moments, and obstacles overcome together painted a picture of a team that had grown stronger through every challenge they'd faced. The elegant dessert plates arrived at the table, bearing delicate pastries and artfully arranged fruit. A natural hush fell over the room as Elijah King rose from his chair, gently tapping his spoon against his crystal water glass. The warm lighting caught the subtle smile lines around his eyes as he surveyed the gathered team. "Tonight has been filled with remarkable stories," Elijah began, his voice carrying easily across the private dining room. "Stories of persistence, courage, and growth. But there's one story that I believe perfectly embodies the spirit of our company." His gaze settled on Sophie, who sat straight-backed in her chair, her hands folded quietly in her lap. "Some of you may not know this, but Sophie's journey with our company began right here in this restaurant. And while the circumstances were unusual," a knowing chuckle rippled through the room, "they led to one of the best decisions I've ever made." Elijah's voice grew warmer as he continued. "In the past 2 years, Sophie has shown exceptional leadership. She's transformed our operational efficiency, strengthened our company culture, and most recently, demonstrated remarkable courage in protecting our company's integrity. Her dedication to truth and transparency, even in the face of personal risk, has set a new standard for leadership." Sophie felt Clara's supportive hand on her arm as Elijah paused, his expression growing more formal. "Which is why tonight, I'm honored to announce that the board has unanimously voted to appoint Sophie Martinez as our newest board member." The room erupted in spontaneous applause as team members rose to their feet. Sophie's eyes widened in surprise, her hand flying to her mouth as she processed the news. Around her, colleagues beamed with genuine pleasure at the announcement. "Sophie," Elijah continued once the applause quieted slightly, "your journey from that first day to this moment represents everything we strive for in our company. Growth, resilience, innovation, and unwavering integrity." Fighting back tears of joy, Sophie stood, smoothing her dress with slightly trembling hands. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady despite her emotion. "This company has become more than just a workplace for me. It's become a home where I've found mentors, friends, and the opportunity to make a real difference." She looked around at her colleagues, many of whom were still standing. "I'm deeply honored by this appointment, and I promise to continue working towards making our company stronger, more inclusive, and even more successful." The room once again burst into applause, with several team members moving to congratulate Sophie personally. The atmosphere was electric with celebration and genuine appreciation for her achievement. As the applause faded into a gentle quiet, Sophie remained standing, her hands now steady as she looked at the familiar faces around her. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the dining room, highlighting the expectant expressions of her colleagues. "When I first walked through those restaurant doors," Sophie began, gesturing toward the main entrance, "I never imagined I'd be standing here today. But what's even more remarkable than my personal journey is what it represents about our company's commitment to growth and change." She paused, sharing a meaningful glance with Clara, who nodded encouragingly. "Look around this table. We come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different walks of life. And that's our strength. Each person here brings unique perspectives that make our solutions better, our innovations stronger, and our company more successful." The team members nodded in agreement, some exchanging knowing looks. Sophie continued, her voice warm but clear. I'm especially proud to be part of a company that doesn't just talk about diversity and inclusion, but lives it every day. My story isn't just about personal achievement. It's about what happens when talented people from all backgrounds are given real opportunities to succeed. She turned slightly to acknowledge Elijah. Yes, I started in an unusual way, but what matters is what happened after. I found mentors like Clara, who shared their wisdom freely. Clara beamed from her seat. I found colleagues who challenged me to think differently and supported me when I needed it most. Every success we've had, from the operational improvements to uncovering difficult truths, has been the result of teamwork. Sophie's gaze swept across the room, making eye contact with various team members. Our strength lies in our differences and in our unity. When we face challenges, we face them together. When we celebrate victories, we celebrate them together. That's what makes us exceptional. The room hummed with quiet agreement as Sophie raised her glass. So here's to continuing our journey together, to pushing boundaries, to supporting each other, and to building something truly remarkable. The team members raised their glasses in response, the moment filled with shared purpose and pride. As they began to gather their things, preparing to leave, the atmosphere was charged with renewed energy and determination. Colleagues exchanged warm handshakes and heartfelt congratulations, their conversations filled with enthusiasm about future projects and possibilities. Sophie stood by her chair, taking in the scene around her. Her eyes wandered over the elegant decor of La Royale, from the crisp white tablecloths to the polished silverware that had once been so familiar to her. The restaurant held such different meanings now, both the starting point of her journey and the setting for this milestone achievement. She felt a profound sense of connection to both her past and present, grateful for how far she'd come and excited about what lay ahead. If you enjoyed the story of Sophie, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.